Welcome to a CNBC Africa special. And today we're going to have a conversation regarding the future of Africa's literacy. Now, gone are the days when we had a Wale Soyinka or, a Chinua Achebe with that kind of grand literature. But where is Africa's literature headed? Now, joining us today is Jide Martin from the Comic Republic, and later on Deborah Ahenkorah from Africa Bureau Stories. Thank you for making the time, and thank you for joining us, Jide. Now, are we not just saying this generation's Chinua Achebes and only able to, look back and say the greatest of African literature is in the past?
No, I wouldn't say that. What I would say is that there's a shift, like everything else, in 2020. The millennials seem to have sway because it's obvious that whatever the millennials are looking at or interested in seems to be what trends. And so in communicating, even with literary works, one has to take all of these things into cognizance and kind of meet the people where they are. Give them what they want to see. That way you also be able to communicate things like values, morals, and basically teach history or fun, whatever it is, but you have to follow what today's trend is to still be relevant.
Jide, you're saying there's a kind of a shift, and when we see with the coming in of new technology, podcasts, vlogs, less paper being read, does that mean that even the writers of this generation need to adapt to the new changes, and how can they adapt to the new changes?
Okay, so beautiful. It's not just, that's a very good question. So it's not just about the technology, it's also about the technique. You notice that you have to start, taking the technology into account while you're creating the content that you're creating. And also you have to take in the interest of young people today. There's a new wave of people not focusing on the very, very serious modem. It's not that we don't have people who don't do that, but you find out that people tend to focus a little more on the things that they have fun with. And it's something that has been seen to work in other countries. Like what we do at Comic Republic is that we make comic books. And it's an old age tradition that various countries, especially the United States, who started the development of comic books, has used to shape the people. Who find out that the major icons, is it Superman, is it Wonder Woman, is it Captain America, you find out that all of them wear the colors of the American flag. And so our superheroes, the truth are, they are American icons. And because of that, they were able to shape the whole country and the community and the world at large to believe that they are the best at everything that they do, and that they can basically save the world. And that's what we need to do. We need to start using techniques that work, that influence people at the place where they're having fun. Your writing, your medium of writing, your style of writing, for example, whatever creative work you're doing has to take cognizance of what's trending, what people want today. And then if you write that way, you'll be able to reach more people effectively.
Is it right for us to say that there has been a collapse in the African-focused publishing industry?
I wouldn't say there has been a complete collapse. I'll just say that we are not, quickly adapting to the times. And that's what, there's a lot of technological platforms out there that help people, reach more people. There are ways where you can, do little work and reach millions of people. But a lot of our writers are still stuck with the book and paper age. And so I wouldn't say it's a collapse yet, but if we very soon do not adapt to the technologies of today and the needs of today, yes, that collapse will come. It's not there yet, but it's on its way. But I do see a lot of writers and a lot of creators starting to learn these new tricks, using more of the tools that we have today, using more of the platforms that we have today, understanding how they work, understanding the best way to use them, and this will shift very soon.
Are you saying or implying that digital is the core or the shell, is the core shell of the future of publishing?
Oh yes, I'm saying that completely. Everything happens on the screen these days. Your financial transactions happens on the screen. Most of your education these days happen on the screen. People want information. What do? They go straight to Google. People want to learn something, they go to YouTube. You want to do a financial transaction, most people will just pick up their apps and do their transfers. So basically, we spend most of our days on digital platforms, either via your laptop or your mobile devices, or even these days, your TV stations. When you look at things like Netflix, a lot of people are on Netflix now more than, regular TV. So the truth is that digital is not just the way forward, it is now. And it is the fastest way to be able to influence the mind of the next generation. And we need to start influencing them now, which is what we're focusing on in Comic Republic. It takes a 30-year cycle to shift the mind of a people. And the earlier we start now, by showing that, for example, people of Africa can be heroes, can save the world. People of Africa are good people. The earlier we can change the next generation's mindset, catch them at the place where they have fun and change their perspective and ideas on life itself.
Won't that possibly the use just to move to digital right now and maybe in the future? With looking at our population numbers and, when you look at things like internet penetration, access to laptops, access to broadband as well, won't that alienate a certain part of our population that actually tends to produce people very deep in understanding of our literature?
No, at all. It won't annihilate if we take steps. First things first is that the governments of the nation need to understand that the old way of doing things don't really work. So that's number one. So if we can get the governments of most African countries to start to put infrastructure and start to support companies that facilitate digital publishing and digital network and digital content, then we won't have this problem much more. If things like internet is pretty easy to get, if things like devices also are a lot cheaper, that will help. But beyond that is the creators themselves, because the truth is, it is very, very possible for creators to create their content to fit both platforms. Meaning, whenever you're writing a book, you should make your book available digitally, for example, and books are just one form of publishing. You make your books or your published content available both digitally and physically. This way, it costs nothing to send out a digital book on any digital platform. It's a lot cheaper than print and distribution physically, actually. So if you make it possible to work on both platforms, then that way you'll be preserving both. The physical content for those who do not have the means to go online, and then the online content for a bigger audience. And I say bigger audience because all of the world is basically online. You can reach people far away, people you would never reach by trying to do a physical distribution by putting it online, but still provide the physical content for people who presently do not have the ability to access digital content.
That brings me to a question. Why do we have fewer writers in the caliber of the Achebes and Sol and Wole Soyinkas of this world?
I don't think we have fewer writers. The problem is we don't know the writers, and that's exactly what I'm saying. Physical books, getting a publishing deal, the cost of printing, network, and distribution is so high and so unaffordable these days that a lot of talented people are not having a voice. A lot of talented people are not having a platform. And so we're still seeing the works of people who have been able to accomplish this feat long ago. But the world has changed. Even the Nigerian economy has changed. I'll tell you that back in the day, publishing might even be a lot easier than it is now. One, because of the shift of interest to digital platform, people who normally would buy books are reading their newspapers online these days. But most importantly is, the wallet share that people have to spend on things like buying physical books these days. So we do have loads of talented writers in Nigeria. You should see what the young people are doing, and even people in the working class. A lot of them write a lot of amazing stuff, but because they don't have publishers to push their books, we don't have awareness of them. which is, again, is why we need to invest a lot more in the digital platform, or the government should try and make things like publishing, all the things that basically will move the economy away from depending on things like oil or land, but depending on content, which if the rest of the world is making a lot of money from. If you look at the richest people, we're talking about people like Amazon and people like Facebook, they create digital content. And they're part of the richest people. I think they're in the top 3 of the world right now. Imagine if Nigeria had the enabling environment, or Africa as a whole had the enabling environment. I don't see why the next Facebook or the next Amazon cannot come from here.
What is, in fact, that enabling environment?
It first has to start, again, with the people who have the means to provide infrastructure. And we need to stop looking at infrastructure from tradition. There's a thing these days where, or before, if you're not a lawyer, or if you don't own land, or if you don't know oil and things like that, you can't make it. That is a lie in today's world. Like I said, the richest people are on digital platforms. So first things first is our governments need to provide infrastructure. Internet has to be everywhere. If it's there, people will use it. It has to be cheap. It has to be affordable. Getting devices, cooperating with companies in China, for example, to bring in devices that are a lot cheaper than maybe the big brands that people can buy for close to nothing. Those are things that only the government can do at a subsidized rate, simply because it wants to boost the economy of either the continent or the country as a whole. Now, when these things are there, you find out that you start to find a lot of entrepreneurial people who learn how to use these devices or this infrastructure that you've made available, and in turn create wealth for the world. But most importantly is, like what we do at Comic Republic, where we create stories of superheroes and icons on digital platform, is that you catch them young. We're creatures of habit, and whatever we learn when we're young is what we display when we're older. We start to instill things like discipline. We start to instill things like moral. We start to instill things like people communicating with people outside the world and learning how to be more industrious instead of just leaning on natural resources. This way, the government provides infrastructure, the people use that infrastructure, and we create wealth within the community, the country, and the continent as a whole.
Thank you for making the time, Jide.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us, Deborah, as well. Earlier, we were talking to Jide. And quickly to dive into our conversation today regarding literacy on the continent and the ability for today's form of writers to be able to replicate that work that was done or has been done by the greats such as Chinua Achebe. Yeah, how can writers reach out, today's generation of writers reach out to young audiences?
I think writers who, are passionate to tell their stories are already finding ways to reach out, whether it's through blogs, whether it's through Twitter, whether it's through their Instagram. But when we talk about published works of fiction, the likes of what Chinua Achebe produced, then we need an ecosystem, right? We need publishers who are actively publishing, who are calling for submissions, who are taking writers' works, supporting them through the editorial process, and then publishing the books, and beyond that, most importantly, getting that to readers. And that ecosystem doesn't exist in every African country. So it limits the places we're hearing writers' voices in print form coming from.
Deborah, how can today's writers adapt to the changes in times, from the book publishing to what now seems to be like everything is going online?
Yeah, I think the print conversation versus the online conversation sometimes is made to seem as if they are two different conversations, but whether it's in print or digital, it's still the same story. So I'm very big on not getting distracted by the medium, but focusing on the story. Because if you have a good story, if it's in a hole, people will come and find it. If it's not a good story and it's on everybody's phone, nobody's gonna read it. So for me, the bigger conversation is about how do we tell great stories that captivate people's imaginations, that make people want to talk about those stories. And the medium is just, how we get to the reader and or consumer, and whichever medium it is at that point doesn't matter because you already have great content.
With Africa's literary traditions on the wane, such a statement that they are on the wane, is that true? How true is that statement?
My work focuses on children's literature, and I think in the past 10 years, we've seen a renaissance of new voices for adult African fiction coming up, and that's been facilitated by international publishers that have been happy to pick up these stories. And then as they are published and the authors do well, the likes of Chimamanda, Binyavanga, Helon Habila, those stories find their way back to the African continent. The place I have the most concern as a professional who's been in this space for nearly 12 years is that we're not seeing a similar renaissance or nascence in the space of children's literature and young adult literature. And it is those young people who will become the readers of tomorrow. So if we're not building those who will read the adult fiction of tomorrow, for me, that's a more important conversation and a bigger problem to address.
Is it right to say that digital is the future shell core of publishing?
I think digital will become a way. I don't think it has to be the only way. I don't know that it will be the only way. I don't think anybody can say that confidently. But in a way that it hasn't been a way, it will become a way. Audio will become a way. Different forms of technology that will come in the future will become a way. Film will become a way for African literature. But I think when that way comes, whatever it is, we have to have our stories. They have to be well written. They have to be well edited, and they've got to be ready to go. And if there was a way we could really hone in on that, put resources behind supporting, training writers, giving them opportunities, so that whatever the medium is, we have the content for it, I think we would put ourselves in a better position to tell the African story more broadly. The African story will not be told by mediums like by the media, it will be told by the writers. So really, how do we support the writers to be ready for whatever form their stories have to go through to readers?
Deborah, is it right to say that we now have fewer writers in the mold of the Chinua Achebes and Wole Soyinkas of the past?
No, you can't say that. I feel like every generation probably has equal measure of storytellers. We have always been a culture of storytelling. And if you look at the era of Chinua Achebe, we mentioned the greats, we mentioned 10 names. So are we saying there were only 10 writers then? In which case, then we definitely also have 10 writers now. So I think, we look at those who rose to the very top of the industry, the publishing industry, and whose stories have become bestsellers over 3 decades. But there were more writers beyond those people as there are now. So I think that there's equal measure. I think the talent doesn't go anywhere. It's not a lack of talent. It's not a lack of writers in the past versus now. It's really an availability of opportunity. And Chinua Achebe, etc., came about because of the African Writers Series, which is an opportunity that gave writers a voice. So if we are giving writers equal voice now, then they will have more opportunity. So in our work over the past 12 years, we've been running the Golden Baobab Prize, which is a children's literature prize, finding writers to create opportunities for them to write and publish children's books. Before we started, one would say, where are the children's writers? Today, every year, we are receiving stories from over 450 writers, sometimes 700 writers. So what's the difference between when we didn't think there were children's writers and now it's really opportunities? So the more we can create, the more we will produce.
Why do we know of fewer writers at the moment?
We know fewer writers in this generation because there aren't enough opportunities. There isn't enough focus on supporting writers and giving them opportunity. So let's say you were a writer, for example, because you love the written word, but nobody's ever approached you to publish. You have a day job. Am I ever going to read your story? No, I'm not. Because the opportunity for you to put that talent on a platform that gets to me hasn't been created. So we have a massive responsibility if we really care about, the culture of our arts and our literature for the next generation. We really have a massive responsibility to pay as much attention to it as we are paying to different areas. If you take the movie industry, the African movie industry, for example, there are now way more movies today than there were 20 years ago. The only difference is opportunity and money is being put into that space. So it's a very simple formula, very simple equation. It always works. Put the resources, put the opportunities there, and the works of literature will flourish.
Deborah, earlier you talked about the need to go digital, and that's the way it's headed. But don't you think this will alienate certain audiences on the continent that don't have access to things like good broadband connectivity, to smartphones, computers, and the likes?
You would be surprised what determination and passion to get your work out there will do for a writer who's determined to get their stories out there. So our literature prize, we've run a literature prize for children's literature for 12 years. And at the time we started it 12 years ago, it was run online. It was a completely virtual literature prize. And even then, when there was very limited internet connectivity 12 years ago on the African continent, we were getting hundreds and hundreds of stories from across the continent every year. And the only way we marketed this prize was also online. So, I feel like sometimes it's easy to create artificial challenges. The only challenge is opportunities are not made available. If you make an opportunity available today, to say that writers from across the continent, if they submit their stories, they're gonna win $1 million. Do you want to bet with me that there'll be 1 million writers? People will write. People are storytellers. We have the stories. We are a culture of storytellers. What we don't have is really opportunity. So whatever challenges, if the opportunity is there in abundance, that trumps, the challenges.
Before we let you go, Deborah, any parting shots?
Yeah, I'm excited that we are having a conversation like this about storytelling, and I cannot stress enough the need to focus on the stories themselves, the need to focus on the writers. It's easy to talk about what's current and what's contemporary. Let's talk about the tech component of storytelling. Let's talk about how we can get it on A, B, and C media and platforms. But if you don't get the basics right, you compromise the end product. And you can have an incredible ebook company. It's still gonna be stories that you're gonna need to put on there. So I call upon governments and people in power, people who have the resources to invest in arts and culture, to really think about investing in writers and investing in opportunities that help them to get their work out there.
Thank you for making the time, Deborah.
Thank you for having me. My pleasure.